My name is Karin Axelsson. I'm professor in information systems at Linköping University in Sweden. And I'm also one of the coordinators of the Swedish Researchers Network in e-government, which have some similarities to the network that Maria told us about. And my main research area, my research interest is obviously e-government and development of public e-services. And therefore, I think it's very interesting to have the opportunity to lead this panel, because as a researcher, I usually struggle to answer the questions that we can pose upon public e-service development and e-government issues. But today, I'm the one who's posing the questions. I got a panel that's going to answer them, or at least give their perspectives and their opinions about the questions. So, first of all, let me introduce the panelists, which I'm very grateful that you have all accepted to join this panel. First of all, we have Margret Björnsdottir. She's an adjunct lecturer in the MPA program of the Department of Political Science at the University of Iceland. And then we have Harry van Dorenmalen. He's chairman of IBM Europe, coming from the Netherlands. And we have Anneli Ekelin, senior lecturer in Media and Communication Studies, both at Linnaeus University and Blekinge Institute of Technology, both in Sweden. And finally, we have Trond Knudsen. He's coordinator of research-driven innovation in e-government at the Research Council in Norway. So this panel consists of smart people, I should say. We talked about smart cities and different kinds of smart devices before, but these are experts looking at this panel theme from different perspectives. We have researchers, we have business representatives, and we have also a representative from the financial part of research financer. So I think that would probably guarantee that we got some different aspects covered in the panel. And the theme that this panel is going to address is about government e-participation and, of course, citizen participating with the government and vice versa. We're going to hear some examples of how this can be conducted in practice and some pictures about things that are going on right now in different countries. But first, before letting the panelists talk, I'm going to look at some challenges that at least I have seen as researchers in this field, and also, as I said, pose some questions. So the main challenge in this particular aspect is that it's very easy to say that we should have citizen participation. All governments, all municipalities and different public administrations should listen to, talk to, meet the citizens. That's very easy to say. And that has been said by many people in many action plans, policies, strategy documents, and so on. But it's much more difficult to achieve this in practice. And that's why we still see a lot of projects where agency efficiency is really the dominating issue, even if we're talking about citizen participation. And of course, this isn't due to any evil ambitions or anything, but citizens as user group or user groups are very difficult to really confront, to find, because these groups are heterogeneous, first of all, and partly unknown many times. So it's not that easy. It's very easy to say that we should involve citizens, but it's much more difficult to really do this. And if we're going to succeed, we have to ask ourselves, who are the users and what are their needs? In what ways do they want to use this particular e-service or e-government portal or whatever, and what do they expect from it? And maybe also what do they not expect? What do they not want to do with e-service and so on? So according to previous research, we can say that if governments can make citizens interested in government issues and also develop easily ways to contribute, to be active, to participate, then we, of course, will get a broader view of what the users, the citizens need, the requirements, challenges, and so on. But this is very difficult, very challenging to really achieve. We also know that there is a relation between the feeling of being involved in e-government projects and the ambition to participate. So it's easy to say that citizens should be active to participate, but if they don't really see any benefits from it, if they don't feel that this really is relevant or important for me as a person, then they won't voluntarily participate. And one conclusion after this is that we cannot see citizen involvement as a separate issue, as a thing that we can think about after the project or when the public e-service is launched and so on. We have to really concentrate on this issue throughout the process of organizing, managing, and performing e-government projects. So this is a very vital issue that has been living throughout the project's time. And this has made me organize my questions around 3 themes of participation. That is practice of participation, incentives for participation, and organization of it. So that, let's just look at my questions before we let the panelists start talking. First of all, if we think about practice of participation, then we could ask ourselves how participation is practiced at all in e-government. We can look at present examples, good ones, bad ones. We also need to ask ourselves who is going to participate. Who, meaning which of all these citizens should we pick? Should we choose certain target groups, for example, who are the most important to really listen to and to get to know? And how should they participate? Once in a short meeting, a focus group, or constantly over time, and so on? That's another question. And how deep should this participation be? What do we expect from it? In what ways do they think that citizens will participate? And as this panel and this conference is about innovation for e-participation, we can also look at all those kinds of new ways of introducing participation, like e-panels, social media, this kind of Google moderator that we heard about before, and so on. What kind of consequences do all these increased new ways of participating mean? Do we get citizens that are more engaged? Do we get better information from the citizens in order to develop new e-services? Or what really happens when we open up the floor for so many new ways of participating? Now we can turn the perspective to incentives for participation. Sometimes we might think about participation as something always good, always strive for, always needed. But I think that we should ask ourselves what the incentives are for different kinds of users, external users as citizens, but also internal users as clerks and citizen services and agency servants and so on, working in the government, but with on the back side or the back office of the e-services, for example. Why should they be involved? Why should they participate? What are their wins and potential losses to participate? We could also look at which roles that should be taken and by whom when organizing for and participating in development. And of course, we can also ask ourselves how we assure that clerks and civil servants really support participation. Because we have to remember that changes in public administration and out to the society also means that we some benefits, but some might risk to lose something. That could be losing jobs, that could be losing freedom, that could be having to do things in different ways, and so on. So there are always pros and cons with changes. And then finally, organizational participation. We can ask how citizen participation should be organized in certain projects in order to give real contributions to the outcome of the project. Because if we meet citizens for a focus group or some kind of other meeting or ask at Facebook for comments and so on, we can't be sure that this really influences the outcome of the project in a real way. So a question to ask is if participation really implies influence. And finally, as you see, I have a lot of questions surrounding this e-participation area. And of course, this also means that there are a lot of implications for further research and further practice examples that could be based on this way of looking at participation as organization of it, both as prerequisites in the processes and what comes out from it. So that was what this panel could be about. Then it's up to the panelists to address some of these issues or questions, or maybe they will just talk about something totally different. We will go on from now with statements from the panelists, 10 minutes each, and then we will open for comments, reactions, questions from the audience. So, Margaret is first.
Dear guests, is the microphone working? Dear guests and distinguished hosts, it's an honor to be here in this very historical town, which I have been trying to get to know yesterday and during the lunch break. And being here in Poland, I must mention that people from Poland are the biggest immigration group in Iceland and are a very important part of our economy and hopefully in the future of our national culture as well. But now to the 2 points I want to make in my presentation. I teach at the University of Iceland about public leadership and change management. And I've also been my lifelong active in Icelandic politics. So the question and the answers or the approach that I will be choosing here today comes from that. My first point is, and this has also been addressed here by many others today, is that e-participation should be regarded as an important factor in strengthening our democracies and working against what a prominent scholar that I will talk a little bit more about later in this field calls the democratic malaise. And this was also addressed by Julia Gittens this morning. My second and my main point, and addressing one aspect of Professor Axelsson's question, the question, how do we assure clerks and civil servants to support e-participation, On that aspect, I will talk about the importance of strong political leadership and political advocacy for e-government and e-participation. And I want to illustrate that with two very different country cases. Estonia, which could be named or called a gazelle in this respect, using Julia's metaphor, and Iceland, certainly a turtle in this respect. Lot has been said about the conditions facing Western democracies today, and I don't want to go deeply into that. I just want to say that there is, and it's not a new phenomenon, although it has increased, there's distrust in government and politicians, but there is increased interest in politics. So most Western democracies face this paradox that people are increasingly interested in politics and having influence, but on the other hand, there is less trust on their behalf in those delivering it, politicians and government. And this should force us to seek new forms and new ways of democracy and utilizing the immense technological possibilities that we have. And thus, we would, among other things, meet the increased pressure on behalf of the citizens, not least the younger generations, the so-called grown-up digital ones, who, according to the author that I cite on the slide, Mr. Tapscott, through his extensive research, has found out that this generation this next generation does not only want ASAP services around the clock, but also, to quote him, care about social justice and are actively trying to improve society. So we have here immense potentials which I think is important for each society to meet, potentials and pressures. The professor I cited earlier, Jerry Stoker, professor at the University of Southampton, calls this the democratic malaise. And he says this is the key dilemma of the 21st century. People are embracing democracy as an ideal, but finding that formal politics and government are not delivering on that ideal. And also he has stated that people, at least in some countries, feel they have less influence today than they had earlier on government. So this is what Julia also talked about this morning, a disconnect between the people on the street and the national politics. Jerry Stoker has also, in his book Politics Matter and in lectures he held in Iceland this September, put up this slide on trends in trust in government. And they're mostly down. And this is probably familiar to you. And this is not, like I said, it's not new, but it, of course, accelerated with the economic downturn after 2008. And this is important because, according to a new OECD study, also presented in Iceland 2 weeks ago, trust in government is one of the factors that affect the use of e-government by the citizens and of e-participation. And so I agree with Lena Roth this morning when she said that progress in this area is a matter of trust. Jerry Stoker has put forward a number of countermeasures where e-government and e-democracy are on the list. And so that should be a big or an important part of the solution, be a part of democratic innovations, and create a vicious circle. And this seems to have been the motivation of the Estonian politicians that I will talk about later, or in my second point, when they decided, as many of you know, to computerize its government shortly after independence. This leads to my second and main point, actually. I just wanted to put this government, e-participation into this democratic context first. But my second and main point is the importance of strong central political will, leadership and advocacy. And it was asked earlier here by someone, do the politicians have any added value? And I hope to answer that in the latter part of my presentation. It goes without saying, I put up here this important triangle, this necessary triangle in motivating and enabling clerks and civil servants to support e-participation. I mean, of course, the civil servants, the turtles, they need the necessary capacities and resources. That goes without saying. And on the other hand, the citizens need to be ready and they need to be able to use e-services and participate in e-practices. But what I want to argue, and based on the two country cases that I will talk a little bit about, is that they are not enough. It's not enough to have the citizens prepared and the civil servants. When changing the way public organizations work, their culture, values, work habits, etc., and doing it necessarily on a national scale as e-participation requires, you need political leadership and commitment as well. I just want to cite one of many studies done on the importance of leadership in change management. And this is a comparative studies of a grand-scale public sector reforms in 11 countries. It was published in 1998, and their management. And I want to quote that study. One of their findings is that political support should be from the highest levels, should be sustained over an extended period, and desirably should include parties not only in government but also those in opposition. But the study also admits that it's difficult to sustain political support since administrative reform are not of major interest to the population and such lack elective value. So they say, like I have here on my slide, reform is not a technical but a very political process. And I think it's important to acknowledge this. Now to my country cases. We have here an OECD compilation of a UN, on the vertical side, axis, e-participation index, and on the horizontal one, e-service delivery after stages, and here is the so-called e-transformational services. No, transactional services, sorry. It shows, this axis shows a high, or this diagram shows a high correlation of the two. There are a few outliers. So countries that are high on transactional e-services provided are usually also high on e-participation. And I have highlighted the two countries I want to compare. Iceland at the bottom, and Estonia very well over the OECD average, near affluent countries like Japan, Canada, and the Netherlands. And you see on this that there's a huge difference between countries. And you see that, like Jeremy said this morning, small is beautiful, small is not always beautiful. It really depends, and depends on a lot of things. But my point will, it depends on the politicians, among others. So, then the two countries. My country, Iceland, an affluent country, high purchasing power parity in comparison, it's over the OECD average, and it's by half higher, 50% higher than Estonia. So So we have here a very affluent and developed society, citizens that rank among the highest in computer and net usage, even the elderly one. People between 65 and 74 in Iceland are up to 76% active net users. We're also a country that have a very ambitious policy document called Iceland the E-Nation. And we claimed in 2008 to become leading in this area, just as we at that time wanted to become leading as a financial market, competing with Reykjavik, competing with Wall Street and City. And then we have generally a very dedicated and well-educated civil servants with good resources. So the question is, why are we at the bottom? And my thesis is, and I know that because I know that very well in Iceland, our politicians, they have no interest at all in e-government. And I was talking to some colleagues from Iceland during the lunch break, and they said, I don't think an Icelandic politician has ever mentioned the word e-government in our parliament. So our politicians are disinterested, there's no urgency, and they view this, as I say on the slide, as a mere technical issue, and they leave it to the civil servants and the citizens.
I'm sorry, Margaret, two more
Yes, very
minutes.
short, just the latest. Okay, Estonia. Maybe I don't need to talk to you about Estonia. You know about Estonia, one of their leading figures is here with us, Mr. Tallo. But in comparing them, I mean, they are much less affluent than Iceland. But they decided, their politicians decided early after they got their independence to computerize. And I quote their president, Mr. Ilves, and he said, it had to computerize. And he talked about the urgency for transparency, fighting corruption. He said you cannot bribe by a computer. So they really took off and got the fundamentals right. I have them here on my slide. The e-signature, a interoperative database called the X-Road. They educated their citizens, both the young and the old, and put a certain percent of the budget, state budget into this. This was decided at the top level of the politicians and the committed political elite, to use the word of Mr. Tallo in an address he gave. So what you see, and this is my concluding remarks, what you see here, of course these are complex issues, and the circumstances in 1994 by Estonia made it much more urgent than for Iceland, the affluent and, well, I don't want to use any negative words, the affluent society of Iceland, much more urgent to embark on this path. But there were countries in 1994 at the same stages as Estonia, and they didn't go this path. So it's quite clear when you look at these two countries, then it is a great mistake, like the Icelandic government has done, to review this as a mere technical, or as some would say, financial issue. I have here a few words about the civil service, the Turkish, and these are words described in a UK report from 2000. And it's right what Jeremy said. They are risk averse. They're cautious towards trying new approaches. And he said that we have to rethink this. We have to acknowledge that failure is good. And I want to add another quote from the founder of Honda, who said, I can't remember his name at the moment, he said, failure is the only road to success. It's not only good, like Jeremy said, it's the only road to success, the founder of Honda, the big company, said. So, what the civil servants need is explicit political support at highest levels to embark on this very complex path. I think for political leaders in all countries, the politicians in Estonia could really serve as a role model. You need to do a lot of things, but at least one issue is important, and that is to work on the politicians. So I hope I've answered the questions that was asked earlier here. What is the added value of politicians? They are essential to this process. Thank you. Sorry for taking my time.
Thank you, Margaret. And next one is Harry from Dormalen.
Okay. So it's been a long day, so I'll try to share some perspective from IBM, how we look to these subjects that we talk about here. I hope I can answer some questions. If not, raise the questions again in the panel in a minute. If you look at this chart, there's something interesting on this beautiful word innovation. And we all use innovation for everything we want to discuss, if you will. And yet, if you go for definitions of innovation, you get a wide variety of arguments, if you will. So it's interesting. So we think we are talking about the same thing, but it can be something completely different. Anyway, I link personally innovation to something that has something to do with doing things differently. Because we all know, if we go in this world today, in the same avenue we've done it before, we know what the outcome will be. It's predictable. You know, it will be the same or less. So the fundamental word is always that you say, as an audience like you have here today, what can you do differently as before that will ensure a different outcome? So that's my few words on this chart. So IBM's view on the world is what we called in our vision, it's called Smarter Planet. And our logic is the following. We fundamentally believe that this world has become an instrumented environment. That means we have our devices, we have over 4 billion telephones, mobile devices in the world. In other words, that's done. You know, our youngsters, they have their Blackberries, they have their iPhones, everything is there. So we are instrumented. So we can talk forever about that one, but that's done. Secondly, we are interconnected. That means that, you know, the world is becoming extremely flat, and we know everything in the world in a second here. So the good news is that we can debate on that one, but it's there. So the enjoyable part comes now, that we use this instrumented, interconnected world, and we're going to use this intelligently. And intelligently means that we're going to do it smarter. And in the European environment, you all know that. We see the deficits of all the countries in the world here. We can say we need more money. We need more money. Well, ladies and gentlemen, trust me, there is no more money. There's a shortage of money. So the only way forward is that we do that in a very smarter way. And here, this consumer engagement comes in beautifully. Because why don't we tap on the talent we have in the world with consumers? Why don't we start getting into the game those people for which we are doing all this effort for, which are consumers? Think about patients. You know, the healthcare system in the European environment, you know we will not have enough money. We know we don't have enough people who are taking care of our older getting population. So the only way is to do it smarter. And if I know now, and the age I am now, that if I'm starting to use technology, and in doing that, I can stay at my house maybe 5 or 10 years longer as before, then I'm interested. And as a consumer, I start being part of that journey, if you will. It's those simple things you need to think about consumer participation, that if you can appeal people, that they see what the value it's bringing to them, that they even like to pay money for that one, then you have an additional circle to it, if you will. So that is our logic. Now, best is always to use some examples, and I have some examples with me, and they are as follows. So a very good example in the European environment, and you might be aware of that one, is the mobility project in Stockholm. And if you unpeel this situation, you see a number of elements that are very crucial in the thing we discussed today. First, there was a mayor, and the mayor took leadership to do something different. Small detail, take leadership. Secondly, he said, I like the mobility situation in my city fixed. And I like all the citizens of the city of Stockholm benefit from the fact that the traffic will reduce, carbon emission will reduce, cost will reduce, travel time will get better, food traffic will improve, and also the local shops, if you will, get a better revenue development because that people are more in the cities, if you will. So, third element in Stockholm, they use the solutions we have available from a technology standpoint. There are solutions for fixing mobility. So they use that, if you will. And most important, they, with the help of the consumers and citizens in the city of Stockholm, they posted results. And if you have those simple things, then there's no single argument why citizens or consumers will not join these things. Because it's a win-win for everybody, if you will. The other nice example is the island of Malta. Malta, 250,000 homes, if you will. The logic is as follows, fossil fuel will be with us for a while, but in 2015, maybe it starts going down. Germany declared, out of nuclear power. The island of Malta needs oil to fuel their energy in that island. And guess what? 50% of the energy of the island of Malta is used to make clean water. So they had a vested interest to apply technology solutions with smart meters in the houses to make sure that they as a citizen can see how they impact by their behavior the energy and water environment of the island. And because the citizens can see what they are doing, what they are paying, how they can influence the usage, if you will, they started to be another ally. In Netherlands, we also did a pilot with NXP and Philips around Eindhoven city, where we put to 500 people, in a mobility test. So they had a car, they got a TomTom device in their car, they got a website at their houses, and they could see, the evolution of their traveling, if you will. And they really themselves could influence their behavior by analyzing by data what is happening, and they could conclude that if they would leave half hour later, if they would take a different route, that their monthly expenses would go down with 10 or 15%. That again is another example that if end users and consumers see the benefits, and they start playing along, then you have something going. In other words, you're not pushing all these solutions. No, the people start pulling those solutions. So that's another example. Then a final word, because we're making up some time here, is in this world we're entering in, we do believe that a few things are important. First, there's this item of what we call interoperability. To me, that means that we really need to have an open environment with open data, open innovation, open standards, really a platform that is open. Open data, as an example, has a great benefit to the SMEs in this geography, if you will. Because SMEs today are spending far too much time for administration. They don't know where to find all the data. If we can help those categories of people with open data, they can focus on what they should do, and that is being an entrepreneur. So that's about interoperability. Analytics, data, according IBM, data will be the new cash. Data will be the new cash. Who has the data has the cash. It's remarkable how much data we have available and how little we still do it. But if we do the right business analytics, we can predict certain things. The picture is from Rio de Janeiro. They took initiatives that they were fed up with this water flooding. And they implemented a business analytics environment where they see if water is coming to them, yes or no, and automatically the whole emergency system is being alerted. If you look to the south of Europe at this moment, certainly a week ago, it's flooding all over the place. And the remarkable thing is, we seem to be surprised by it every time. How can we be surprised? Why we have the technology and the information to do that. If citizens with their social media devices also start helping there, which is simply another source of data, you know, that can help the whole circle spin around. So that's another point. Role of social media. You know, clearly in social media there are risks, and I know the situation on data privacy, etc., etc., etc. But there are even more opportunities. Social media provides a source of information where people simply post their ideas. At IBM we did an innovation jam many years ago, and we simply asked, and we used the intranet for that, to our employees, what do you think about where we need to invest our money in? And we got about 65,000 ideas. And with the right technology, we slowed that down to 20 great ideas. And we trimmed that down to 10 best ideas of the company. So simply what we've done, we tapped on the talent and the information and the ideas people have, and we brought it into an equation. So if you ask to patients, and if you ask to students, and if you ask to talents, and if you ask to citizens, what they're thinking and how they can tap in and join fixing the issues we have to face, I mean, that is working beautifully. But the mindset should be accordingly. It should be an open environment, and that should be the mindset of it all. Final 2 words, communication. Share your successes. You know, I mean, another example is that the University of Bari, you know, in the south of Italy, which is not the richest part of the world, if you will, the university, they formed a pact with the fishery and the winery industry, which were flat on their back, basically, in that part of the world. But they said, listen, can we use technology, our university skills, but most of all, your personal interest as a wine farmer or as a fisherman, you know, to get this back to life. So another example that if you use the citizen, the people that are most impacted, and you make them part of the solution, it can work. And the final one is the leadership item, and that's what the previous speaker told about as well. If there are no mayors, or if there are no political leaders, if you will, like we have in the private sector, you know, chairmen and CEOs, you know, who take leadership, and who say, listen, I heard enough, but now we go that way, because it's possible, because it's realistic, you know, then we will not get there. You know, and that's what we need to do. So those are a few perspectives from a private environment at IBM on how we perceive this situation. Very optimistic, but it's really down to open, teamwork, and speed. Those are the 3 words I'd like to conclude with. Thank you.
Thank you. And now it's time for Anneli Ekelin.
Okay. We all need a lot of tools. This one? Yeah. Okay. I think I will be standing here so you can't see me. I will be talking out from the box. I will do something in between. Okay. Yes. Well, hello everybody. My name is Anneli Ekelin, and I'm from the southeast of Sweden. And I'm working, as Karin mentioned here, as a senior lecturer in Kalmar or in Linnaeus University in Sweden. But I am also a postdoc within Blekinge Institute of Technology, which I would like to acknowledge here. I would like to bring up a couple of perspectives which are based in some research projects which I have been involved in, which will put focus on innovative practices. because I think that is very important to address also in this context and in this discussion. What is innovative practices and in what ways do they differ? And I will give you some pictures or scenarios or whatever you want to call it about different perspectives here. But first of all, I would like to start with a question, and that is a question about user involvement. And I would like to take it a little bit further and pose the question, does user involvement in development of eParticipation tools matter? Because that is something which is the base for my presentation here. Yes, and then first of all I would like to say a little bit about my perspective. Since I'm obviously a researcher, I have a certain perspective. And my background or my basis for this discussion is within Scandinavian tradition of participatory design. And that means that I put a lot of emphasis on participation and how we look upon participation. Different levels of participation, different dynamics within participation, and what participation could become, actually, because it is, in that sense, not a frozen concept. It is something which is constantly evolving, which we, of course, are aware of within these practices. I have also background working within interdisciplinary research and development projects, which is the main thing developed within Blekinge Institute of Technology. A close cooperation with the local authorities, with small local business entrepreneurs. And I have also, as I said, a very strong interest for user involvement, both in software development and service design and policy development. I also put my work practice perspective on all this, because work and the outcome of work is not separated. It is as important, I would say. And I also work with a specific approach. That means that we have this action research idea that when we are going into this kind of interdisciplinary work, we also would like to intervene in some way. And by doing ethnographic field studies and iterative design cycles, you can actually see something grow and follow a process in a different way as compared to when you come in afterwards and make an evaluation or something like that as a researcher. So I wanted to point out this because it, of course, it influences my choice of projects and so on. I would like to raise this question of practices of participation, or rather practices of innovative participation, innovative practices. And I think from my experiences working with these, there is a need for shifting perspectives between self and others. And that means that it is important to bring in different perspectives in this process of innovation. I am, as I said, working at a small technical university. And we came up with an idea. Basically, it was developed in cooperation with the local authorities, with people, users, and a special user group which was focusing on accessibility from the perspective of being disabled. They were, for example, they had wheelchairs and they had problems with their physical movements in the city. And we started to discuss that. And what happened then? The next thing was that we had no money, of course, and we wanted to really bring this forward, bring forward this idea and take it into something which could be of use for this user group, since we had this interest of doing action research. At the same time, we got money from a project, for a project which meant cooperation between India and Sweden. And we coupled these projects. The cooperation with India was about mobile services, and also the project which we came up with together with the citizens in the region was a tool for tagging and presenting accessibility problems. So we coupled this, and the thing was that we developed prototype together with students from India and students from Sweden. And in that sense, we could bring forward both these ideas. The project in India developed into measurement of regional water management and also support for sustainable farming. In Sweden, it turned into a project called Augment, which is a participatory accessibility project, meaning that we actually developed a prototype for a handheld device where you could mark out accessibility hindrances. The Augment project, which I started to talk about here, is about people's participation and how one could take this further in an iteratively way. We had a couple of development processes, and we can come to a certain level. But the problem was that we needed to bring in this into some kind of participative methodology. And there was a newly set up internal department for innovation. So they offered us a possibility to set up something called proof of concept. That means that they gave us the help of a methodology for taking this project further. And what happened then? We had this constant dialogue with the users, and they had examples and ideas of how to take this handheld device further. But the problem was that we got stuck in this methodology for innovation, or rather the methodology which they presented within the frames of this proof of concept. So there were difficulties really coming up. And the problem was, very shortly, that the users wanted developers on demand, and the developers wanted users on demand. It's a roughly short description of this. And the users also wanted support on demand. And this is a very difficult circle. It goes round and round. But could we have done this differently? Well, it depends, I would say, about the image or the picture we have of what innovation is. In these contexts, the predefined description of what really is legitimized and presented as innovation made it very difficult to take it further.
One minute left.
I see now there has been a problem with the slides because I had pictures actually from India. And I wanted to visualize the thing that there is differences even within, but also between different innovation contexts, different innovation practices. They could look different from what we imagine and what we think this is labeled as innovation. So that was a main point, actually, that we should not forget that innovation is practice and that it could look different. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Anneli. And the last statement will be from Trond Knudsen.
Thank you. How many of you are living in towns and cities with tramways or buses with an electronic ticketing interface? How many? Very good, quite many. E-participation for a better government. Most of these companies are governmentally owned, or owned by the municipality, or they have monopoly in their area. Why haven't they learned from each other's experiences? Did you do a bad job in the participation for these systems? Well, participation is overly complex, it seems. I will briefly go a little bit back to what participation for government what e-participation for innovations in government, for new governmental systems might mean, which context it is. It is not a simple context. We're talking about participants here. Who are the participants? The participants are citizens, but what interest? What is the citizen's platform? What does the citizen want? What are her interests? I'm trying here to show you the governance perspective, which means that the citizen has a very rich and wide interest in being a participant for innovation of government. And when you are talking about e-participation in governmental systems and structures, it's not the clear-cut context. Our democratic welfare states has a complex set of laws and